3 Pennsylvania detectives are dead. 2 more are fighting to survive. And a quiet township has been turned into a crime scene. Officers went to serve a simple stalking warrant. Instead, they walked into a deadly ambush that has stunned the entire nation. Tonight, we break down how a routine call turned into one of the most tragic law enforcement shootings of the year. In this video, we take you inside the investigation of the deadly shooting in North Codorus Township, Pennsylvania. We will follow the timeline of the attack, reveal what authorities have uncovered about suspect Matthew James Ruth, and examine the warning signs that led up to this tragedy. We will also look at the larger issues of officer safety, domestic violence, and how police handle dangerous warrants. By the end, you will have a clear picture of what happened, why it matters, and what comes next for the families, the community, and law enforcement across the country. The rural town of North Codorus Township, Pennsylvania, became the scene of a devastating ambush this week. Law enforcement officers arrived to serve a stalking warrant. They never expected to walk into a deadly firefight. 3 detectives died at the door. 2 other officers were seriously wounded. The suspect has been identified as Matthew James Ruth. This attack has shaken a tight-knit community and reopened urgent questions about officer safety, domestic violence, and the dangers of serving warrants. Here is how the day unfolded. Officers from the Northern York County Regional Police Department and a York County Sheriff's deputy went to a farmhouse on Har Road around mid-afternoon to carry out an arrest on stalking and related charges. Detectives expected to take the suspect into custody. Instead, someone inside opened fire. The first rounds hit officers at the doorway. The situation escalated rapidly into an ambush-style attack. Multiple officers returned fire. The suspect was later shot and killed by police. Officials described a chaotic scene that moved from an attempted arrest into a prolonged and violent encounter. Pennsylvania.gov. We must name the victims. Northern York County Regional Police identified 3 detectives who died: Detective Sergeant Cody Becker, Detective Mark Baker, and Detective Isaiah Emmon. These were experienced officers with families, colleagues, and long records of service. The department, the county, and neighboring agencies joined in public mourning. Communities gathered at a makeshift memorial outside the station to leave flowers, flags, and messages of support for grieving families. The loss of 3 officers in a single call is a profound blow to any law enforcement agency. The suspect, Matthew James Ruth, is now publicly identified as the man accused of the ambush. Authorities say he was 24 years old. He had been the subject of complaints by an ex-girlfriend who alleged stalking, prowling, and trespassing. She and her mother reported fear for their safety. Investigators say Ruth had been seen near the home the night before, apparently looking in windows through binoculars and carrying a rifle. A trail camera image reportedly helped officials track his location. Those details help explain why detectives were involved and why they sought a warrant. The weapon matters. Officials reported the suspect used an AR-style rifle in the ambush. Law enforcement found evidence that he may have been lying in wait, prepared to use lethal force against anyone who approached. The combination of a high-powered rifle, camouflage clothing, and concealment at the doorway produced a lethal advantage. Police often warn that domestic violence and stalking cases can be among the most unpredictable and dangerous assignments. This incident painfully confirms that warning. What led to the warrant is important to understand. The ex-girlfriend and her family had reported troubling behavior for weeks. They described unwanted contact, prowling at night, and a pattern of intimidation. Local prosecutors filed charges, including stalking, nighttime prowling, and criminal trespass. Authorities obtained the warrant to arrest the suspect and to protect the alleged victim. In many domestic violence cases, officers try to remove an alleged abuser from the scene to prevent further harm. In this case, the removal operation turned into a deadly confrontation. The immediate law enforcement response was massive. County and state police rapidly converged. SWAT teams, crisis negotiators, and tactical medical units stood ready. The scene stretched into hours as officers secured the area and treated the wounded. Hospital staff worked to stabilize 2 critically injured officers. Local authorities set up family support centers and coordinated with victim assistance programs. The response highlighted how agencies work together in a multi-jurisdictional crisis. It also exposed the strain such events place on small departments with limited resources. Officials Officials have described the motive as tied to domestic violence. York County District Attorney Tim Barker pointed directly to stalking and a history of harassment as the root cause that drew police to the home. He said the case illustrates the deadly consequences that domestic violence and stalking can produce, especially when weapons are involved. This framing shifts part of the conversation from random violence to targeted attacks that grow from intimate partner conflict. That distinction matters for prevention and for how communities allocate resources. The human toll extends beyond the fallen officers. Families of the wounded face long hospital stays and uncertain recoveries. Colleagues cope with trauma and grief. A department that once handled routine investigations now must replace valued team members and support survivors. Small towns feel the loss deeply because relationships are personal and interwoven. Residents lined streets to honor officers. Vigils drew hundreds. The community's sorrow and anger turned into calls for better protections and for stronger measures to prevent such tragedies. This event raises hard questions about how police serve warrants safely. Serving an arrest or search warrant always carries risk. Tactics vary. Agencies consider whether to announce presence, use dynamic entry, or seek armored support. In domestic violence or stalking arrests, officers sometimes use coordinated entries and backup teams. Other times, they try to de-escalate or negotiate. There is no perfect strategy. The violence in this case demonstrates the need for constant review of protocols, more training on domestic violence cases, better intelligence gathering, and equipment that protects officers at close range. The politics of the response will be immediate and intense. Elected officials, including the governor, issued statements condemning the attack and promising support. Discussions about officer safety often produce calls for more funding for protective gear, for tactical training, and for mental health services for first responders. At the same time, this tragedy will feed national debates on access to high-powered firearms, red flag laws, and how the justice system handles stalking complaints. Expect lawmakers to propose measures and to use the incident as evidence for their positions. Civil liberties advocates will also weigh in. They will remind the public that most arrests do not end in violence and that protections for due process remain essential. They will argue that harsher enforcement protocols must not erode rights or produce unnecessary harm. Balancing officer safety and civil liberties is always difficult. This case will prompt renewed calls for better risk assessment tools that can identify which cases most warrant high-security tactics without criminalizing ordinary behavior. The investigation will take weeks. Authorities continue to gather forensic evidence, review body camera footage, and reconstruct movements at the scene. Investigators will interview witnesses, analyze ballistic trajectories, and examine the suspect's digital footprint. They will look for warning signs that might have predicted the escalation. Prosecutors will document the timeline carefully, even though the suspect died at the scene. The goal is to build a full and public account of what happened, so families, officers, and the community can understand the facts. The legal aftermath includes potential civil suits. Families of the victims and the wounded may file claims related to how the situation was handled. The ex-girlfriend might seek protections and assistance if she experienced threats and property damage. The county and municipal governments will review vendor contracts for protective gear, examine training budgets, and consider changes to dispatch protocols. Insurance and liability issues also arise after any multi-fatality incident involving public employees. Expect long, careful administrative reviews in the months ahead. Media coverage has been intense. Local outlets provided names and background on the officers. National networks placed the event in a wider pattern of risks faced by police. International outlets highlighted the domestic violence angle and the role of firearms. Coverage also included audio from press briefings and images of the memorials. Responsible reporting will matter. Communities deserve accurate timelines and verified details rather than speculation. Journalists must balance speed with care in reporting sensitive family and criminal justice matters. This shooting also touches on firearms policy. The use of an AR-style rifle in an ambush has revived debates about the availability of semi-automatic rifles, background checks, and storage requirements. Legislators will likely cite this incident in arguing for tighter restrictions. Opponents will stress enforcement of existing laws and mental health interventions. Whatever the policy path, Tragedies like this force the nation to confront the choices that govern access to deadly weapons. Raiders, community resilience matters. In the days after the shooting, neighbors brought meals to officers and to the victims' families. Local businesses donated supplies. Clergy offered prayers. These small acts of care create a foundation for recovery. Yet resilience cannot replace policy. It must work alongside prevention measures and legal reforms to reduce the risk of future ambushes. The community's embrace of grieving families shows how local solidarity can help heal after violence. What should you watch next? Officials will release more forensic details. Hospitals will update the status of the wounded officers. State investigators and possibly federal partners will issue a full timeline and an after-action report. County leaders may propose changes to arrest protocols and funding. Legislators at the state level will hold hearings about domestic violence laws and officer safety. National advocacy groups will amplify calls for policy change. Follow official pressers and reliable local outlets for the most accurate information.